There's 1 out of 2 machines are working. I'm doing an emergency repair today, but I'm going to be doing something that's so yeshivish that it's unbelievable if it can work. And I highly, the condenser coil will shot in 1 of the 2 machines. One machine will probably keep up if it's going to be a cool night, but I'm still sweating. You might not sweat, I'm sweating. And the one and the basement machine also is down, but that for sure we have the part for. That for sure we have the part for. We have to shut the air conditioner off, the condenser fan will flat. But the problem is that I might not be able to get the part for the upstairs machine. It's likely not a stock part. So what I'm planning to do is a new age, and plus the part might be very expensive. So what I'm planning to do is, what I'm planning to do is, I do this for the Masifta. I might even take the same machine that I put in at the Masifta and take it back if I can't get it. Is I bought a separate outdoor air conditioner and I connected it to the rooftop just to get the machine to work. That worked out to be much cheaper than the repair. It's a little sheevish, but it works. The problem is when I did it for the Masifta, 3 months later, the heat exchanger went. So I had to replace the whole machine. So I have a machine sitting on the roof of the Masifta. I just have to check if it's the right voltage and I can swap it over. But I'm a little sweating. But one machine does work fine. And it's only going to be 17 degrees tonight, in the evening. So it won't be so bad. If it's only 17 outside, one machine will be plenty. But we like the redundancy anyway. No, the guy's paying money to rent the hall. He's none of the cooling. So hopefully we'll be able to get it working. But we're starting first thing in the morning. Okay, let's see the Gemara. Amar Ula. This was all recorded. Amar Ula. It was in camera. Amar Ula. Ches mine treifos nemru loi l'Moshe b'Sinai. There were 8 types of treifos, 8 categories of treifos that were given over to Moshe and Sinai. Morning. Nukuva, things that have holes. Upsuka, things that have been cut. Netula, things that have been removed. Rashi says as nitla kovet. V'chasura, things that are partially deficient. Kurua, torn. Derusa, attacked. Nefula, Rashi says nafla min agad. Now Rashi now categorizes some of the other treifos we learned about, how they fed in to some of these categories. So Gluda was the animal that had its skin removed, was Blachal Natula, Shanita Lyra. The Nechtachu Ragla, we said Nechtachu Ragla Minar Kuva Lamaila is Bechlal Chasur, something's missing. The Shaf Miduchte, like the Simonim that were Shaf Miduchte, or the hip that was dislocated, is Blachal Natula. Oh, I'm sorry, that's the hip. If the simonim are dislodged, or vakiris tzela, or if one rib was dislodged from the spinal cord, or v'chavisas kolgoyos, the smashed skull, or al b'chlal shvura, and ubasar achoifa, that was the layer of meat that covers over the b'nei ma'ayim, if that's torn, hainu kerua. Okay, so now we have the different types of things. La fuke lakusa the rachish parpapa. This excludes the lukusa of Rachash Rapapa that we had yesterday. I think Shmuel pointed out that for once we encounter Rapapa's son not in a siyum, right? If one of its kidneys is sick, that would also make it a treifa. Amr Chia Barava. Ches treifos yesh b'nekuva. There's 8 examples of Nakuba that we actually discussed yesterday. We went over to 1, and that gave us an extra 7 for the Shav Shmaitza. Im timer test, and if you want to say it's 9, because one of them was Nakuba Samara, if the spleen was punctured, Mora, Rabbi Yosy, Rabbi Yehuda Katanila, that's a Shita Yochid of Rabbi Yosy, the Rabbi Yehuda, and we don't necessarily have to hold like that. The Tanya, Nikva Havkeba, Nikva Adakim Treifa, Rabbi Yosef Yehuda Imer Af Nikva Hamara. Lemute Lakusa the Rachish, the Chulya She'ena B'Chalelu, which is not in this list of categories that we just made. Upalag Ula would have to argue with it. Vim Timer Yeshna B'Chal Lakuva. Why did you say Lakusa? If it's damaged, it's no different than if it had a hole in it. As a matter of fact, the Gemara says if part of the lung is sick, we consider it nekuva. So why can't you say that same thing regarding the chulya? Lav milsi, that's not a taina. The havale nikva hakula. Lav milsi, the havale nikva chulya. The chulya would not be considered nekuva if it's laksa. There's no mandam holds like that. I feel a rachish moidi the nikva kula ksheira. Rachish agrees that nikva hacholyos ksheira uvelakuzu the tar. So therefore, you cannot say by cholya by the kidney if it's not well, it's considered nikva because nikva is not even a problem. And look who says, Amr Rabbi Yitzchak by Yosef, Amr Rabbi Yochanan, halachic Rabbi Yosef Yehuda, which would be not like we just said over from Ula that all the categories of treifas are there. There's actually a different one of I'm sorry, not like our Mishnah says there's only 8 nukuvais, only 7 nukuvais. There's actually 8 because one of them is nikva hamara, which we pass on like Rabbi Yosef Yehuda. That's also a problem. Right, and we pass on it. And we pass on it. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, halach Rabbi Yehuda. Zakt the Gemara weiter. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Maya hadru lei chavrei Rabbi Yosef bar Yehuda. The Manda Amram, the Roiv who argued in Rabbi Yosef bar Yehuda, what was their argument to him that nikva ha-mora should not be a problem? Zok the Gemara, it's from a pasuk in Iyov. Iyov is complaining, Yosayvu alai Rabba, I'm surrounded by people who are throwing arrows at me. Rabba would be an archer, someone who throws arrows at me. I'm being shot by everybody with arrows. Yefalach kil Yosy, my kidney will be removed. V'lo yachmoil, and yishboich la'aretz mirarasi, and my mora will be punctured and fall to the ground. Now Iyov survived, yet he describes these things that he was suffered with. Yishboich la'arev mirarasi v'adayin Iyov kayim. So that would be a raya that someone could survive with that. Rashi yivlach kliyosay hani lukusa utreifa. Oh, so it doesn't mean cut. It means it became sick, got damage. Amar lahem, they told him you can't be a raya from there. Ein maskir ma'isanisim. So I would have thought it's not literal. He means like I have so many tzaros, and he was like it was a figurative speech. But the Gemara is learning it's literal. But even though it was literal, the reason why he was living is because that was the deal Hashem made with the devil. You could do whatever you want him, just make sure he stays alive. So sure, in such a scenario, it's possible someone would survive. But normally that would be a treifa. One of the things in the pasuk is his kidney should get destroyed. Mika chaya, a person couldn't survive. Elanisa, it must have been a nace. The chsiv rak es nafsoi shemor. Hashem said, yeah, do what you want him, but you got to keep him alive. Hachanami nisa shiny. Zokt Rashi. Ein maskir mashanisam lahavi rayim. Hand rakas nafshe shemor. Makas tzmavas hakeyu. Hashem let the Satan give him the punishment of death, but to keep him alive. L'kach nitztava lishma nafshe kedamin b'shutin gadol tzari shal Satan shaliyev. Look at this. Look at this. Boo-hoo. Poor Satan, how he's suffering. Break my barrel, but make sure the wine doesn't spill. That's a very difficult balancing act to do. So the poor Satan had to do this hard job, but you're suffering. Halacha kedivrei ha'omer kizayis. The halacha is like the mandamer who says kizayis. What are we talking about? The be'inan kizayis shir b'nitel ha'kaved. We said nitel covered in gantin is a treifa, but if there's even something left, it will be kosher because the liver regenerates. How much is that little something that has to remain? It's a kazayis. Uplukti bepirkan zakrashi to machloikes here. There are minon stamim masis nadodi. There's actually a stira in stamish nais in the diyukim that you can make from the stamish nais. The katani reisha. In the Reisha in our Mishnah it says Elul Trevis Nitela Koved V'lo Nishtar Mimenu Klum. That would be mashma. Hanishtayer kshera. If even a little bit was left over, it would be kosher, even less than the kazayis. V'alpagav like the kazayis. But the other Tani, then we have another Mishnah. I don't think we learned it yet. Eluk sheiros nite like v'nishtarim and the kazayis. That's mashma that you need to have a kazayis. So it's a stira. Umukminan loket anoi. The Gemara is going to say that there's a machlokes tanoim between the Reisha that says even a mashu of liver is enough, that it shouldn't be a treifa, and the sefer that says there has to be a kazayis. The reason why we're quoting this discussion now is mishum deshmaita the Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef mishmei de Rabbi Yochanan, because of what Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef will say in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. So let's see what he says. So earlier he said Allah about the Gemara, but now we'll see something else. Zok to Gemara, Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef Rabbi Yochanan. I guess they were very involved in Hilchas Treifas. Halacha kedivra Aimer Kazais. We're going to pass like the second Stam Mishnah that says a Kazais has to remain for a liver to be kosher. And the Omer Rabbi Yochanan Hachi, did Rabbi Yochanan actually say this? The Omer Rabbi Barachana Omer Rabbi Yochanan, the general rule is halacha Stam Mishnah. Utnan, and our Stam Mishnah, the Reisha says Nitla Kaved V'loy Nishtari Men Klum Ha Nishtari Ksheya Afagav. They'll have a kazayis. So if I have a Stam Mishnah that says that it doesn't need a kazayis, how could Rabbi Yochanan faskin that you do need a kazayis? Zok to Gemara, Amayroy ninu v'alib Rabbi Yochanan. It actually must be a machlokes Amayroy. If Rabbi Yochanan ever said that Stam Masnisin halach Stam Mishnah, maybe he never said that. Maybe he specified this Stam Mishnah is halach k'moisei, but not all Stam Mishnayos. Now Rashi and Tosfos have a very interesting twist, because we've learned many times in the Gemara, Amaroyin in the Valib Rabbi Yochanan. But here Rashi gives us an important twist which Tosfos agrees with. Let's have a look at Rashi. The Amar Rabbi Yochanan halach Stam Mishnah v'hanami stamahi v'umay umay the Seifa Mireisha. So that's the problem. The Kasha is in Stam, a Stam Mishnah contradicts the psak that you need a kazayis. It's a steer in Stam Mishnayos. So now the question is, maybe Rabbi Yochanan said Allah Stam Mishnah, but what would Rabbi Yochanan do in the case when you had two Stam Mishnayos that were contradicting? That's what we're discussing here. Amari Ninu, Rabbi Yitzchak Sovar. Rabbi Yitzchak understood the Lechayel Rabbi Yochanan Lameimer Allah Stam Mishnah, Elahecha de Svirle Amar Behedja Allah Mishnazu. Rabbi Yitzchak held there's no such thing that Rabbi Yochanan ever said is as a blanket rule that Allah Stam Mishnah. There's no such thing. What it is whenever Rabbi Yochanan felt the halacha was like this particular Stam Mishnah, he would say, I like that this Stam Mishnah. That's what Rabbi Yochanan was. That's what Rabbi Yitzchak in the name of Rabbi Yochanan says. But a different Amora said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that it's a blanket rule, Allah Stam Mishnah. Now in our case we have a problem because we have two Stam Mishnahs that contradict each other. So if you have a good reason to say that one Mishnah is more right than the other, like a case in Sanhedrin, also Rabbi Yochanan would follow the Mishnah, the Stam Mishnah that's obviously the more logical one. But if he didn't have a compelling reason to pass like one Stam Mishnah over the other, there he wouldn't pass like either one. In our particular scenario, if we would have found a good reason to paskin that you do need a kazayis, we wouldn't say we would say no. We paskin like a Stam Mishnah, but here you have a problem that there's two Stam Mishnayos that contradict each other, and it makes sense to paskin like the first one. That's what we would have said. But the problem is there is no reason to believe that you would dafka need a kazayis of kaved to rejuvenate. Since there's no good reason to paskin like one Stam Mishnah over the other in our case, that's why Rabbi Yitzchak had to reject the whole klal. Because if not, then they wouldn't have been able to paskin like the second Mishnah that requires a kazayis. And Tosfos says the same thing. Okay, so to go more weiter. So now we have a different interesting case. What if there is an organ that has a hole in it that would normally be puzzled, but the way the organ is situated in the body of the animal, it's pressing up against something else that would seal the hole. So Zokti Gemara, the Amar Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Masna, is it there or is it there? Let's see if we change the gear. The Amar. The Amar Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Yosef Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Mora Shanikva, a spleen that had a hole in it, but the kaved sosmosa, it's pushed up against the liver. That's how it sits in the body. So therefore, that's like a naturally occurring plug. Ksheira, it would be kosher. V'yam Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Yosef Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Nikav HaKurkavan. Now the kurkavan is like the stomach of a bird, and it's very muscular. It's a very muscular tissue, so it doesn't have a thin wall. It has a very thick wall around it, similar to a heart. There's a very thick meat, and then there's a chamber inside. But the kurkavan, there's a thick, meaty wall in it, but the inside is lined with a nice slippery lining, which is referred to as the kiss. So nikav hakurkavan, if the muscle tissue of the kurkavan was punctured, the kiss shaloi kayim, but its inner membrane is still intact, that's not considered fully punctured, kosher. Iboilu, what if it was the opposite? Nikav hakis, the kurkavan kayim. What if the inner lining was damaged, but not the thick heart meat? It's not heart, it's a stomach meat. My tashmad amar b'yochanan zikav zeh nikav zeh beloy zeh kosher. If one or the other was punctured, it's a non-issue. It's only an issue if they're both punctured. We'll take a quick peek because we actually have a good drawing of it, of what we call the Heilige Kurkavan. Baruch Ber once called it the Heilige Kurkavan. He had a shot on the Kurkavan. So let's have a look over here. So this is the veshet. This is the digestive system of a bird. This is the veshet coming down from the throat. It goes into the zefek, which is a preliminary sac. This is what they tore out by a carbon of an oif, and they threw it. Then it went down into the kurkavan. So you can see there's a thick, meaty layer around it, but this inner area is a lining. And you have a better breakdown of it over here. And here you could see the shaykhid is actually pulling the lining. The lining adheres to these walls, but it could be removed if you peel it out. So it's a distinctly separate layer. Okay. Now we have an interesting question. Omar Rava, Shnei Ayros Yesh Lo Veshet. We know that the veshet is comprised of two linings. Chitzon Edom, the one that you see from the outside is red. That's why you can't tell it's a drusa, because it would normally show up with speckles of blood, but blood on a red lining, on a red surface wouldn't be visible. Upanimi lovan, but if you opened it up inside out, of course you can't see that without cutting it first, is white. So there you could see impressions of red, and that's how you'd be able to sense if there's an issue here. Nikav zeh beloy zeh. We know nikav aveshet makes a treifa, but what if only one of these two layers was nikav? It will be kosher. Why was it necessary for Rava to teach us anatomy? Rava was not an anatomy teacher. He didn't teach us biology. He was teaching us halacha. So Lagabi, what halacha is irrelevant, that what the color of each of these two membranes are. So the chalif treifa, because if the coloring of the white turned red and the red turned white, that would be an indication that the animal is treifa. Let's see Rashi. Does Rashi say the chalif treifa? Rashi does not. But if the membranes change colors, it means that there's a problem there, and therefore it would be an issue. Zok to Gemara weiter. Iboilu nikvu shneim. What if both layers were punctured, but zeh shaloi kineged zeh? It's not flush right through. So maybe where each hole is, it's protected by the other thing, just like we said, when you have a mirror that's pressed up against the liver, it'll plug the hole. So maybe within an actual vessel as well, one layer will plug the hole of the other. Now, Omar Mazut in the Papa, Beveshet kosher. It would be kosher in the veshet, which we know has two distinct layers, red and white. But the korkavan is a similar scenario. It would be puzzle. And we're going to have to see why in a second. Now it says the word puzzle, but it's really treifa, which is what the Tziyonim changes to treifa. Matzkel Rashi. Correct Rashi Adraba. I think it makes sense to say exactly the opposite. Veshet, the ochlabe, the animal eats with the veshet. It's a very actively moving part because the veshet has muscles, that red part has the muscles that squeeze the food down and up. In a cow, it's a two-way street sometimes. So there's constant movement. Upayabe, rovach, and it chews and puts it to a super highway. Gumdale, upashale, it will sometimes contract and sometimes it will expand. So if there's constant movement, the layers, even though the holes don't align at that moment when you're checking, but as things move up and down, it might align and then you'll have a hole. Zimnin the mahandazin bahada adodi. Sometimes through the movement, the holes on either layer will line up, and then you do have a hole through and through. But korkavan on the other hand, the menich nayich, it's generally in a steady state. Kidekoi. There it makes sense if the lines are not aligned, they'll never get aligned. But by the veshet, they could get aligned. Amar Abacha Bared Rabbi Yosef Rabashi, you know what Rabashi, you're 100% right. That's exactly what Marzutra said over in the name of Rapapa, that if the holes are misaligned by the veshet, it's still a treifa, but by the korkavan, it's not a treifa. Zokt Rashi, upayabe, this is what's done with the veshet, tzayekis. So some groans that an animal makes is actually through his veshet. That's what I'm saying. A gribitz and pipik. Noise can come out of your pipik too. It doesn't only come out for your windpipe, right? There's a fellow in shul who happens to make certain brachas very loud. So the minister tells me, anyway, no names are necessary. Even though we know primarily your windpipe is what transmits voice, the veshet flexes when the animal is making noise. He breathes. That I don't understand because you don't breathe through the veshet. Gamdo kavetis means it will contract, and mahandazim means it will expand. Misrami, no, pashta would be that it expands, but zimin de mahandazim meaning they line up. Misrami de machavna hadodi. So therefore, that would be worse. V'yomer Rabba krum she'Allah machmas maka beveshet. Sometimes, if there's a hole in the veshet, the body will naturally create some type of natural sealant to it. Einoi krum, that doesn't count as a krum, and the animal will be a treifa. That krum will not help. Now here we're going to learn a simple, innocent Rashi from which there's a major machloikis halacha l'maisa today. And let's look at this Rashi. Einoi krum, the imnikev, if the veshet was punctured, the nistam, and it got plugged from this krum, afilu also by stima ava, even if a naturally occurring thick layer of whatever gunk it is that would fill the hole, einamis kayemis. It will not last. It's not a long-lasting seal. It's going to leak. Kedarminim biyavamis bekikrois shafra, bekrush shafra, which is in the nether regions where there's an issue there. Nika pasul, but nistamus would be kosher. V'zehu psul shachozer lechsherei. That type of psul can get healed. Zehu lemute krum she'olam machmaka bereya she'enei krum. By the nether reasons, that stuff a krum might work to solve a hole, but it would not work by a lung. And we're saying here it wouldn't work by the veshet either. The chol nukuve the tarvis loy mahanyelu stima the salkabul achazman. anytime there's a puncture that passes, if it becomes sealed, sometimes in the future it will not work. It's not like the raya shenikva, but it's pushing up against the wall, which is naturally occurring. It's not doimah to that. Ulastima is covered b'mora, like we just learned as well, where there's a natural plug. Ulastima the rechayim b'cholchaylis lekaman ha'istima meikari. So this seems like a very benign Rashi. There are animals there are milk cows. There are milk cows that have an ailment in their keva that it swells, and the way it's solved is they do an operation, they do an incision, they release whatever it is that's swelling it, and then they sew it up, and it's a permanent seal. So the question is, when Rashi says, afilu stima of einimis kayemes, what is pshat in Rashi einimis kayemes? Does einimis kayemes means the stima will not be miskayemes, the plug won't last? But if we can come up with a permanent solution like stitching, which is something that we have nowadays that they probably didn't have those days, that would be good, and therefore the animal is not a treifa, and therefore you're allowed to drink milk from such an animal? Or does einimis kayemes means the animal cannot survive? Because Rashi says something that's a little bit contradictory. Here he says the stima won't survive, but then Rashi says, even if it would survive, but it's never like if there's any type of time delay, doesn't happen right away, that's also possible. So the question is, what does Rashi mean? Does Rashi mean the reason why it's einimis kayemis, meaning the wound is the layer, the healed layer, that's einimis kayemis, and the reason for that is because it doesn't happen right away? Or maybe Rashi is saying einimis kayemis, the whole animal won't survive because any solution that comes after a delay will never work to keep the animal alive. So now there's a huge shaila if an animal with a stitched stomach will be considered a treifa, and whether or not you can drink milk from it. And it's a very big discussion that turns up even in the Achrayim. It turns up. I think even Rabelsky weighed in on it, whether or not you can drink milk from such cows. So the interesting point he points out here in this book is that you see how much halacha l'maisa is from a small nuance in Rashi.
You wouldn't see this outside the stomach.
No, this will be on the inside here, the stomach.
Cow, you can't check it. How do you know?
No, they know which cows were operated on in a dairy farm, right? If a cow was giving milk and it had this ailment, so that they would correct it. So you wouldn't be able to use that cow anymore for milk. You can't drink milk from a treifa cow. Now you can assume it's not treifa because it's a right. You don't have to check Common Freya, but if you know an animal has to have an operation, that's a whole different story, right? It's like most of the treifas we don't even check for, right? But if you find it, you got a problem.
The Gemara is talking about a natural plug.
Well, that's precisely the Shaila and Rashi. Depending on how you learn Rashi, is any plug that comes later, would that be a problem, or it's only because it was natural? That's exactly what the discussion is. Pshat and Rashi.
What do you think? You can't drink milk from a
Treifa cow.
so now they have this lady monthly people have like ailments in their throat, in their mouth, and infections, so they squeeze milk right out of the goat into their mouth.
You could do that. It's not pasteurized, but you could do it.
Yeah, no, okay, but it's very supposed to be like my daughter had it.
And she used unpasteurized milk?
Yeah, she drank straight. They drink straight,
Straight from the udder?
Under the udder, and it's a month of Shabbos. This lady, it's near New Square. There's a few of them.
That would be a funny sight to see. If people lining up to drink from the udder of a goat.
Her daughter thought it was very good, but she was in agony her whole Shabbos.
Really?
Oh yeah. I was in agony her whole Shabbos with my Shabbos.
You have to be in a lot of pain to start drinking straight out of the udder of a goat. That 100 people before you drank out of.
A lady in Chester said, go to this lady, work for Shabbos. She goes behind the house.
Okay, I have to ask my cousin. Ari Grubner about that. Ari Grubner lives there. He's a doctor. I want to ask him.
But I'm telling you, and they drink that. But I guess for eggs, for
so you have to make sure the goat is not a treifa.
But busy of that.
Unbelievable. But and how much does he charge per drink?
And I imagine
it's not my business. It's not here. That's right. You're allowed to eat it right after Shabbos. They probably still inflation.
What ailment does it help?
She had an infection in her mouth.
Your daughter did this?
My daughter, yeah.
And it worked?
It worked right away. And it said it's unbelievable. It's just like
Mouth.
you'll do whatever you have to do.
Oh.
Unbelievable. Okay. Zok to Gemara weiter. You learn new things every day. The Amar Abba Krum Sha'ala Machmas Maka Beveshet Einoi Krum. The Krum that's Allah Machmas Maka on the Veshet is not a Krum. Amar Abba Veshet Ein Loi B'dika B'Bechutz. You can't be biting the Veshet from the outside because it's red. Ela Mi B'Fnim. Lamai Nafkamina. V'Asamir Nafkamina. Gemara L'Safek Jerusa. Safek Jerusa. How would you be biting it? You would be biting it by seeing if there's reddening on the white lining. Zok Rashi, the Safek Drusa, Kigayin Hanach, the Ikala Mechashlu. It's speaking in the case where we're not sure if it was a Drusa or not. So we have to check. Come on, Iu Kashasik, Vinu Kamakakrin, against some animals quiet, some was noisy. We'll have to see the scenario there. The Amrina come on Drusa Shamru, Tricha Bedika, the Eina Asur Achiyadim, Keneged Hachalal. It has to be read near where we assume the claws went into the animal. By the simonim, it's achi adimu asimonim atzman. The simonim have to be read if you're choshid that it's a drusa. If the simonim are read, then and only then is it considered a treifa. V'loy shenikev ela sha'ores madim asimin umachalkol v'yori l'choloi. The poison causes an infection, so it creates reddening. Ubeveshet and in nikra admimus alamibefnim shar lovan. And in a veshet, the reddening as infection. When you have an infection, it gets red. That shows up really well on a white surface, but it doesn't show up so well on a dark surface, on a red surface. Hahu Safek Drusa da Soila Kameda Rabba. Rabba had the paskin on the Safek Drusa. This is a very fascinating case. So Zokt Rashi have a kabotikla rava leveshet me'avroi. He didn't want to kill the animal, so he was being boidikit from the outside. Let's have a look at Rashi. If it was a bird that we were discussing, boidik hakana tchila, he would be boidik to kana, and then he could check the kana and it would be kosher, and then afterwards, once it's dead, he could check kataveshet. Because you perik sheni v'shachar hakana v'chsherei v'achagach badik haveshet. But if it's a behemoth and you have to cut it, and maybe b'mokav anikev nokav, maybe the shechita was right where the hole was. Nami is b'takanta, you still have a way to check. The bishlam agabe nekev ikalameimar dilma b'mokav nekev shachat. Avagabe drusa, we said the whole area has to become red. So therefore, keeping the mekoy meimadim afilu shachat boy yehake b'mashu, you could still cut it open and put it inside out to see if there's any reddening. Amar lo Abaye. Abaye told Rabba, "V'amar Huda Amar, didn't you say veshet ein lo b'dika elami b'fnim?" So Rabba at first only checked from the outside. So Abaye said to Rabba, "Your own halacha says that your b'dika is not a good b'dika." So Rabba right away listened to Abaye, his Talmud. Apche Rabba u'baktke. He actually turned it inside out, and then he was boidik it again. Vishtaka chalei trei korti dama, and he saw dominant v'tarfa, and he paskin that was treif. So the question is, what's pshat in Rava? Why would he do it? Rabba, why would he do it wrong? He was doing it wrong, but about he would have never released it. He was just he said while it was live, it's not treifa, because he wanted to know if Abaye would chap that you need to cut it up and look inside, and in fact, Abaye passed the test. Amar Ula, Yoshev loy koitz beveshet. This is like a live test. This was like a live test in real life. Rabbanim do that. I remember when I was taking fahers on your day by Forsheimer, he would accept shilas from the outside. If a woman called in, he would answer those shilas during the faher. So what he would do is he would listen to the shilah, he would cover it from. The lady's calling in, she wants to know the face, the milk, the frying pan is it good? Oh, it's straight, you got to hush it down. It's no problem. That's what he's doing. So let's get more weiter. Amar Ula, Yoshev la koitz beveshet. What if a thorn got entrenched in the veshet? Zokt Rashi, how would that have happened? Because the animal ate thorns. It got lodged in his veshet, but it didn't puncture thoroughly through. and v'kayat dam ein ba b'fnim, and you don't see blood. So you just have a thorn that's lodged in the veshet. Ein choshin shem hivri. You're not choshin that there was a hole and it got better. Rather, we say it's kosher. It was never damaged. Rashi says, "Ein choshin shem neka v'yav hivri v'yakrum sha'olah machmas maka b'veshet v'einakrum." Rather, it's kosher. Developed. According to Ula, why is Yoshav like Kosh Beveshet? We're not sure that it made a hole. It should be like a Safek Drusa. Why don't we treat it like a Safek Drusa? So Rashi, the Mishum, the Ol Aribenayu, if we even know that a lion was walking among a flock of goats, we have to assume Amrina and Shema Doras Umachrechin Lebedika, and we would have to make a bedika. Here it would be impossible to make a bedika. The neck of mashu ba'ar chitza and shalveshet laiminker. You couldn't possibly tell. It doesn't get red. It's not a drus over here. So how could you allow it? So Gemara kasaver ula in chayshin l'safek drusa. You never chayshin. So Rashi the plukta the Rabbi Shmuel B'Pirkin. You're not chayshin for safek drusa unless you know for sure. Frank Gemara, how could you not be chayshin? There's a real scenario here. There's a thorn. So we know for sure there's a potential for damage. It's not some out of the blue you're being choshed. There's something that happened here that should indicate fear. Where you have to bring a nashim tali. Zok Gemara, hasam is chazik yisura. Here, a thorn doesn't mean iser, but when there's a piece of chaylev here, that is chazik yisura. But over here, it's loyas chazik yisura. Why not? Talk Rashi. She yeshivas kites, but loy nekiba in the klum. Just because it's lodged there, that doesn't mean that it's automatically a hole. What happens if you shecht with a knife and then you find out afterwards that it was pagum? So again, there you have to ask the behema. That's because something concrete happened. So Rashi even though it didn't have a chazak of psul before, because you checked the knife before, but it was a siyalad, a new thing happened at the end. Rashi says, chazik yisura, where you would say, reference l'meimer b'midi d'mekar, something that happened in the past, like the chaylev and the shuman. The chaylev was there before the safek happened, and the siyalad would be about something that occurred later, like a nick that was found in the knife, shaykh l'meimer b'midi the l'besayf. So zok to Gemara. Why isn't this different than any other suffix tamah b'shus hayachid, which is fekei tameh? Frank the Gemara, if you're going to ask me that question, which we know is fekei tar. Ella hasam milchus gemira l'misaita. Suffix tamah b'shus harabim and suffix tamah b'shus hayachid are things that we learn halacha l'Moshe Messinai from Saita. I don't know if it's halacha Moshe, but we learn it from Saita. And without an apparent logical explanation. The Haki Gemir Lamisaita, we learned that from Saita. That Saita, she's Tomei Misafik, when she was Nistra, which is a Yochid. But in public, you don't have it. So therefore, don't bring me a raya to our case. Okay? So Yosef Umar about the Kamitra of Kana, there was someone sitting in front of Kana, the Yosef Kamar, and he said as follows: Nimtzas Itmar, Avol Yoshev Chashinon. Nimtzas means that we said earlier from Ula, Yoshev Lakoitz, he never said Yoshev Lakoitz. Yoshev Lakoitz meaning it was lodged into the skin. No, that's not what happened. You found it there. We don't even know if it lodged into the skin. So Nimtas Itmar. It's only in the case if you merely found a thorn in the animal's neck. Avol Yoshev, but if it was actually lodged, then you are Chashin. Then Chashina. Amal Rav Kahana, Lois Atzisule. Don't listen to what this Hahu Rabbanan is saying, because it's not true. Yoshev Itmar. The halach is Lakula, like Ula, even if it was lodged in. I don't need Ula to tell me that if you find a thorn in an animal's esophagus, that it's going to be mutter. That happens every day. The Chulu Chayu, B'riyasa, any animal that lives outside, he eats on the ground, he's always swallowing these types of things. So, of course, Ula doesn't have to mention that that's kosher. Ula's saying a chiddush that even if it was lodged in, it's going to be kosher. Itmar. Turbatz Haveshet. Turbatz Haveshet, Zokt Rashi, is Mokaim di Bukai Balachi. So, the Veshet actually has three parts to it. The veshet smack in the middle, its main pipe, is a very soft pipe. So if you took a very soft pipe and cut it, it will just fold over, right? It doesn't have rigidity. Then, as the pipe gets closer to the top, to the mouth, it gets a little bit thicker, and it would be more like a drinking straw. A drinking straw that you cut, it wouldn't just fall on itself. It would maintain its rigidity, unless it's one of Trudeau's paper straws, right? And then, right where it connects, it's a much thicker, harder muscle. So Turvat Saveshet is that area right where it's connected to the throat. So Zok to Gemara, Turvat Saveshet, Rav Omer b'mashu. Rav says even if it's damaged by a mashu, it's going to be possible like the veshet itself. Shmuel Omer b'rubai. There you need roiv. Rav Omer b'mashu makom shchitahu. He holds you're allowed to shecht at that point in the veshet, and we know that anywhere in the veshet where you could shecht is called a veshet, and nikev b'kosher would be aser. So Rashi makom shchitahu v'imshach hacham ksheira hilchach. If you could check there, it must be considered a veshet. The chigamiri hagrama bekanu digmiri. You're going to tell me it's way too high? By the kana, we said if it's at that level, because that's parallel to a place in the kana which would be out of the zone. In the kana, you have to be in the lower zone, but the veshet you can cut even higher. Avol beveshet l'shayach hagrama. So zok to Gemara, makom shchitu. Shmuel Amar beruboy lav makom shchitu. He holds you not a lot of shech there. High near Turbat Saveshet. Where precisely is the zone that we're referring to as Turbat Saveshet? Omar Mori Bar Mar Ukva Omar Shmuel Kol Shechoitcha Umarchiv Zehu Turbat Saveshet. If you cut it and it opens up wider, that's when you would say it's called Turbat Saveshet. And that's the uppermost portion that has muscles around it that open. But if you cut it and it retains its shape, that's part of the veshet itself. The great master does not agree with you. Umani Rav Bibi Bar Abaye. He said, if you shecht it and it maintained its rigidity, if you cut it and it just collapses. Zok to Gemara, you know what is a Turbat Saveshet? It's mivalasa. It's where it swallows. Rashi says mivalasa makoim beis hablia kari turvets. The right where the animal swallows, which is basically the entrance from the throat into the esophagus. Samach l'roisha neck of moed, very close to the hole in his throat that the food enters through. That's what we're referring to. It's right at the top. And it's oimid b'm koimai. So that's Gemara. Kol shechayt b'm koimai zot tervzeshet ella. Where's my voice? Where did I get this? Oh, here it is. V'chama Omar Bavia pachus misayrasa. It's a very small place. It's less than a barley, but it's greater than a wheat kernel. So it's a very small area. Zok Gemara hu tura dahavel of Rav Ukva. There was an ox that belonged to the children of Ukva. The aschul be'shchita be'turvet saveshet. They started the shchita in the turvet saveshet, the gomer beveshet, and they finished it in the veshet. So the question is, if it's the makam shchita, right, and it's possible b'mashahu, it's not a problem. He shechted there. If it's not the makam shchita, so then it doesn't make a difference if there's a hole there, because it's the nekuvas veshet wouldn't possible. So we have a machlokes if it's the makam shchita or not. And what Rava did is he passed in a major chumrah. I'm going to combine the two chumras, even though they're contradictory. And I'm going to be terifnalei, and I said it was treif. Chumrah the Rav, Dama Rav Mashu. Rav said it's not the makam shchita, and therefore, I'm sorry, the chumrah of Rav, who Rav says that even a mashu of a hole will be a problem, but the Amar Rav makam shchita. But Rav said it's a makam shchita. So Rav said it has a din of a veshet, and if it was punctured, even with a mashu, it's bad. But Rav also holds it's a makam shchita. So the fact that he cut there would be a kosher shchita. And because Shmuel don't allow makam shchita. So frankly, more to mamish astira. You can't take two churmas if they're mutually exclusive. Ika Shmuel ha'amar berubai. If you hold like Shmuel that this is not a mokum shchita, so the fact that you cut part of it before you got into the proper place in the veshet shouldn't be a problem. And if you hold Karav, b'mashu, there's not a problem because Rav holds the mokum shchita. So the shchita was good. So why in the world would Rava put together these two factors that are mutually exclusive and contradictory to pastel behema? Igalgo milsa, this there was a tumult. People were talking about it. And Matay l'kamei Rababa, Amalahu Tura, this ox, Bein l'Rav, Bein l'Shmuel Shari. No matter who you ask, Rav or Shmuel, they both say it's mutter. And you, Rav, are saying it's also because of Rav and Shmuel. Zilu Amru Lei l'Barei Rabbi Yosy bar Chama. Go tell the son of Rabbi Yosy bar Chama, whose name happened to be Rabbah, the Lishlim, the Mei Tura l'Mari. They threw out this ox because of his chomer de kapsak, which is not valid. He has to pay them for it. Omar Mar Barei de Ravina, Moisvina to Yufta, Klapisani de Rava. I actually have support to Rava. I have a to Yufta to the enemies of Rava, meaning I could prove that maybe he does have justification. Why? Lo'olam Elchazah Kedivrei Beis Hillel. We know you paskin like Beis Hillel. But right to lasis Kedivrei Beis Shammai Oisa. And if you want to do like Divrei Beis Shammai, you can do it, or Kedivrei Beis Hillel Oisa. However, if you do Mikula Beis Shammai or Mikula Beis Hillel, you're a Rasha. And if you do Mechumah Beis Shammai or Mechumah Beis Hillel, all of Akasav Omer, Haksil Bechoshech Hoylech, that's Tamaful, which is really describing what Rava seems to have done over here. Ike Beis Shammai, stick to them, Kikulein Ukechumrein, Ike Beis Hillel, Kikulein Ukechumrein. So we're still going to have to develop what the raya was, because so far this seems very damning evidence against Rabbah. So we'll see what happens tomorrow.
I'm gonna have to read it down. It's so